Hi, I'm Larry Puckett. Well, as I told you last week, I've been very busy. I've installed all of the roadbed here on the layout, except for one small section, and I'll talk about that later. But today we're going to take a look at installing turnouts, because it's a fairly straightforward, easy thing to do once you know what you're doing. And I'm going to show you how I go about it. And I think I've probably installed a couple of hundred turnouts at least in various layouts that I've built and helped others build. So I think that brings me up to expert status with this, because I've got a lot of experience with doing this and installing switch machines and getting it done right so that you don't have any problems at all. So we'll definitely be taking a look at that. There's a couple of other things, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So let's roll the intro and we'll get started. Hit that little red subscribe button, and when the little bell comes up, click on it and click all. Now, the first thing I want to do is address a few comments that came in as a result of last week's video. I know that there'll be some of you who are not interested in hearing that, and for those of you that want to go ahead and jump forward to the point where I start looking at what I've done here on the model railroad and how to lay turnouts, I will put a timestamp right here, and you can scroll forward to that point to begin. And after we go through the section on the turnouts and roadbed and all of that, then I want to go back to the track plan, because what I've done is I've updated this version of the track plan now to include everything that I talked about in last week's video and what I'm thinking for the future. And so I've put a lot of stuff on here, and we'll run through that fairly quickly and give you an update on that. So let's go ahead and get started with the comments. Okay, so one of the questions that I had, and many of you had, was whether or not the roadbed would be able to take a curve without puckering up a lot. And what I did was I set up a test with an 18-inch radius and a 24-inch radius curve. So and those are fairly common, because 18-inch radius is commonly used in set track, and it's the minimum radius that most locomotives now are made to take. Whereas a 24 is a little bit more liberal curve and something that a lot of people might use. I figured if it gets to 24 and it works, it's going to work at 30 and 36. So I didn't try to go out that far. So let's take a look at what came out of this. Well, first off, this is the 18-inch radius curve. And you'll note it's laying fairly flat. It did not lay flat at first. It was puckered up, as I expected, when I went ahead and used the unmodified roadbed material. So what I did, you can see there's a black line down the middle here. I took the roadbed and cut it in half, very similar to what you do with cork roadbed when you split it. And so then I was able to curve this two pieces without any problems at all. If you see any pucker here, it's right here, because this box is a little bit warped from sitting down here in my basement for several years. But at any rate, with an 18-inch radius curve, you're going to have to split this stuff in half and do each section. But that wasn't really all that difficult. I ended up using a utility knife like this one right here, and it cut right through it without any problems at all. Much easier than using the blade on my X-Acto knife. So this is the kind of thing you'd want to use. I like this a lot. I've got a small one and a large one, and the individual blade sections break off so that you can renew it once the tip gets dull. So that worked really good for splitting this. Okay, so for 18-inch then, you're going to need to split it in order to get it to take that curve without puckering at all. Now, as far as the 24-inch one, that one came out fine. It's got a little bit of a pucker here as a result of the way it's laying on the cardboard. This one here is caused by the fact that it's draped over the edge. And here again is because this box is not flat. But it'll go around a 24-inch curve without any problem. I'm convinced that the adhesive will hold it without any issues. And for anything larger than 24, it's not going to be an issue. Now, for anything in between, you'll just have to test it and find out. In many cases, it might take the curve if you're up towards 24. If you're back down towards 18, it might not. Okay, so that's it for that one. Oh, also, I'm going to pass this back to the folks at Walthers and suggest that they consider adding a score line down the middle of this roadbed in future runs of the product, so that it'll make it that much easier to split it when you need to go around these narrow curves. Also, one person at least suggested that this was very expensive materials. So I went to the Iron Planet Hobbies website and looked up what this was selling for. You can get a package of 5 of these for $11.99. If you want to use Midwest cork, it sells a package of 5 for $11.57. So when you do the math, they don't come out that much different. And right now, you can't get the cork roadbed. It's out of stock. Okay, one question that came up concerning the edge here on the straight pieces is, how do you get it so that you've got this slope like you have on the straights? Well, that's pretty straightforward. What I did was, this is a pair of what are called bandage scissors. So you've got a blunt end here and a sharp end here. So I'm just going to run this along and snip it at the angle like so. And as you can see, you can still see the cut marks here, but all of those are going to be covered by the ballast when that's applied, because we're going to ballast all of this stuff. So that should take care of it. And if you're careful, you can actually get this to where it doesn't leave much of a cut mark at all, but I'm not concerned with it one bit because the ballast is going to be sitting on top of it, and it's going to cover those cut marks. So let's see, how well did I do as far as matching the slope? Well, let's look. Looks like I did a pretty darn good job there, if you ask me, of matching the slope there. Perfect. Matches it almost identically. So that's how I'm going to be going about cutting these edges in order to get the slope to match that on the rest of the roadbed. Now let me also point something else out to you. Walthers also has another version of the straight roadbed that is twice as wide for double track. So for an area like this, I could have gotten some of that double track if I had asked for it. They probably would have provided it. But at any rate, it's going to work out fine. And it would be about this wide, but it would have the slope built into it. So that's something to think about in your planning when you're doing your modules, is to consider using for double track sections some pieces with the slope that are twice as wide. And that way you won't have to do this alteration here. Okay, let's move on. Now what I want to look at here is, this is a crossover that I have created, and I've created a custom piece of foam roadbed underneath of it, the same way as I did for the double crossover that I showed you in last week's video. And this crossover is going to allow trains on the main line to go into the passing siding for the passenger station. And I made this using 2 of the Microengineering number 6 turnouts that I use a lot. And I can't tell you whether this would work with Walthers turnouts or anybody else's turnouts. I've only tried it with Microengineering. So if you want to try it with some of the others, it might work. It possibly will. I don't know. The only way you can tell is if you try it yourself. And I've put a link to that video that I did on creating these above me, so you can check that out. Okay, let's go ahead and move on and take a look at laying turnouts. Now this is the turnout that I consider central to the whole track plan here, because it goes off of the passing siding, and it's the point where the layout splits. And it's very important because right here, as you can see, are those jumpers that have to be on the main section of the turnout itself. And then the rest of this turnout will be on the right section and these other two short pieces will be on the left. Now, this is central because the double crossover is attached to it, and then the crossover I just showed you will be attached to that one, and then the flex track that goes off to the other industries will be attached to it, etc., etc. So everything kind of snowballs off of this one piece of track here. So we need to get this one done right. So that's why I'm going to focus on it primarily as part of this video. Okay, I've taken the double crossover out, and I want to show you how I install a turnout. And you're going to need a fairly sharp marking pen for this. I'm using a Sharpie here. And what I'm going to do is mark the location of the points so that we know exactly where to install our switch motor. And it can be a tortoise switch machine, it can be an IP digital, it can be any type. And what I'm going to do is mark the exact location of that set of points so that I can know exactly where to cut the hole. And so I've got it centered here in its position. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that Sharpie and I'm going to mark the location on each side of that throw bar so that I can drill a hole right in the very center there and get it centered up properly. So I'm going to make a mark on one side first of the throw bar, and on the other there. And then I'm going to make marks in the very center of the throw there. So I'm going to center it by hand and then make a dot on each side of it. Okay, now we'll take that out. And then I'm going to get a ruler and I'm going to make a couple of lines. So let's connect those two dots, and then we'll connect the other two dots. So now we have an X marks the spot. And right there is where I'm going to be drilling the hole for the throw rod that comes up from the switch machine and goes through the tie bar on the set of points. So the first thing we're going to do then is we need to cut out the rubber or the vinyl material that the roadbed is made of. And for that I'm going to use my X-Acto knife blade. So let's get that out and we'll start cutting. To cut this opening, I'm going to use my X-Acto knife blade, and let's go ahead and just follow the circle around and cut it out. And I'm trying to go all the way through the foam and down into the sub roadbed because we're going to need to get all of that out of there. So it'll probably take a few passes in order to do that. Let's pop out that foam plug now. There we go. And we'll get out some of that foam roadbed as well, or sub roadbed. Get that all cut. And then now I need to get a pair of tweezers, and we'll take those tweezers and pull out all of that material down in the hole there, get it all cleaned out so that when we drill, we can get a good clean cut down through there without all of that material getting in the way and raising the roadbed up. Sometimes a hemostat can be a very useful tool for doing this because you can reach down in there and open it up and then grab whatever's down there and pull it out. So we got it pretty clean there. Okay. Now I'm going to be using a 3/8 inch drill bit. Now the tortoise instructions said to use a 1/4 inch, but because I'm using a 1/2 inch of sub roadbed and a 1/2 inch of plywood and the roadbed, I'm going to make it a little bit bigger hole. Okay, so let's drill it out. There we go, punched right on through. And that should give us a big enough hole for the throw rod from the switch machine to go up and run through the center of the throw bar on the points. So let's clean that out a lot. Okay, and I'm going to run we'll run this down through there to get it cleaned out. And that gives us the centering location for the tortoise or the IP digital, whatever switch machine you're going to use we can install directly under that. Now, one of the things I'm going to use are these DCC concepts, and they call these a tie bar labels, and the number on that is DCP-CML, and that's 12 of these tie bar labels. And I'll show you in just a minute what those are used for. And you should be able to order these right now from Iron Planet Hobbies. However, because of the tariff situation and uncertainty, I have no idea if they're going to be able to get these in stock anytime soon until the tariffs are straightened out. Now what this is, it's just a print of what looks like a piece of cork roadbed. And then underneath those white strips, it's adhesive, so it will attach to the bottom of the ties underneath of your points, and it looks like you've got a piece of cork roadbed down there. So it will help disguise the fact that there's a gaping hole down there that we've just cut for the tie rod to slide through. And you can see it's got a little hole, a little slit already in it for installation over the hole, so that the wire from the switch machine can come up and go up through the center of your point tie bar. Okay, let's take a look at how we're going to go about installing this. Now, one of the first things you need to do is remove that little spring, the centering spring mechanism, from the underside of this. This is a Walthers turnout. And it's important to remove that spring because if you don't, it will decrease the lifespan of your switch machine. So it's fairly easy to remove that, and it will reduce any of the friction and pressure created against those against your points, and it will help your switch machines do their job, and they'll last a lot longer. So make sure that you do that. And you can see there's just a little clip right there, and you can barely see, I can see that spring in there. And what I'm going to try to do is just pop that little plastic cover off. And that's just a little plastic cap there that I'm trying to lever off. And it will pop out of there in just a second. Okay, so now with that spring clip removed, we can begin the process of installing the tie bar label. So let's check it out one more time, and we'll peel off those two white strips that covered the self-adhesive there. Let me get that out of there. I'm sorry I can't show you that too well, but there we go. It's clean now. And we'll put that right here on the back side of our points. I want to get that so that it's the opening is centered right over the hole for the little wire, that spring wire that comes up from your switch machine. Okay, so that's what it looks like. Get it down here, and you can get a better view of it now. So that's what it's going to look like. And then the label itself is primarily going to be covered with ballast. But if you see anything, it'll look like it's just some cork roadbed underneath of there, and it's going to help disguise the fact that there is that big opening where the switch machine spring wire comes up through there, and it will also help prevent ballast from filtering down through there when you're ballasting your turnouts. So that's how that works. This is a great idea, and in the past I always had these gaping holes under my points, and as long as you weren't looking down on it, you really didn't notice that much. But at times, when you're trying to take a photo of something and you've got that gaping hole in there, it really just sticks out for you. Whereas something like this, it's going to really disguise it quite nicely. So I grabbed a tortoise switch machine, and I've inserted the throw rod up through there. So you can see this is what it's going to look like once it's installed. And of course, I'll have to shorten that spring wire there that's coming up through the center of the points, so we can move it left to right without any problem at all. And again, that is a 3/8 inch diameter hole that I drilled through there. Okay, so now let's go ahead and start applying some adhesive here and get that laid down. Now make sure leave that area right around the points free of adhesive, because you do not want to lock anything down there. Also, try not to over apply your adhesive, because you do not need a lot of adhesive to hold your turnout or your flex track in place. So I've just laid a fairly thin line on here. If you do apply too much adhesive and it oozes up between the ties, leave it alone. Don't mess with it. Don't try to use anything to pick it out and clean it up at this point. Wait for the adhesive to completely dry. And then you can go back and pick it out with an X-Acto knife or any other sharp tool that you can get between your ties and get it cleaned out a little bit. But if you try to remove that adhesive out of there while it's wet, it's just going to be a big mess for you in the long run. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and spread this stuff out with my putty knife like I've shown you in the past. Just get a nice thin layer of it spread out here so that it's not going to ooze up between the ties. And you really don't need a lot, because after you put it down here and it's dried, it's going to hold the turnout in place. In addition, you're going to be applying ballast and ballast glue down here, and that's going to hold it even tighter. You'll see that I've got my dirty old putty knife. I left it soak in water overnight, and then I scraped it off with a metal knife blade, and it came clean again, and it's ready for another 10,000 miles of use. So those things, you can just clean them up quite easily, and if you just leave it sitting in water overnight, it will loosen up that adhesive if it hasn't dried too far. Okay, one more pass here to get a nice clean line laid out. Okay, now that we've got the adhesive laid and I've put the turnout in place, let's go ahead and roll it, get a good firm contact between it and the road bed. And you don't have to worry about this too much, because that adhesive does a great job of holding it. Plus, once you put the ballast on and all of that glue on there, that's going to hold it firmly in place for you. Now, one thing I like to do is install these push pins in here so that it does hold it firmly where you want it to be. Put that there. And it's going to hold it down. Okay, that looks good. I'll let each of these dry for 24 hours for the adhesive to set up completely. That's the minimum time that they list for this to completely set up. And while this one's drying, I'll be installing all the other turnouts here on the layout. Now, last week I showed you how I was planning to lay the roads here in this module, but I made all of the modifications to the module track plan and updated it so that you could get an idea of that. So let's just take a look at that real quick. So right down the center, you see we've got the road coming in as I showed, and it's going to cross that number 5 turnout right there using the Walthers street system in order to get around this issue with the frog. And then it's going to go on straight across, and then we're going to have a 4-way intersection with, you can go to the left to go down to the parking lot between the station and the depot. You can go to the right to go down to the Railway Express building. If you go straight across, you have access to these industries back in the back here, plus the rear of the Railway Express itself. And then if you make a left, you can go down to the meatpacking plant. Or if you go down past the station, you can make a right there and go across to the meatpacking plant. So there's going to be quite a bit of roads in this module. And most of these areas back in here behind the Railway Express, that whole area in there will probably be paved, because there's going to be big trucks coming into the Railway Express there to pick up loads. And the same thing at the meatpacking plant. There's going to be a lot of trucks coming in there. So one thing I've been thinking about is right here, smack in the middle, where there's that big open space against the backdrop. I'm thinking of putting in an oil and propane dealership back here in this back section so that we'll be able to add yet another industry. And I do have one of Walthers' interstate oil kits, so I've got all the materials to do that. And it's just a matter of whether or not I would be willing to park tank cars right there on that long piece of track, or if I need to put in a switch to go back to the left. Haven't looked at that, haven't thought about that enough yet. But there's a lot of time before we get around to laying that piece of track. Okay, what else? Well, you can see all these red dots that I've included here. Each one of those is where I'll put a magnet uncoupler setup. So I will be using the neodymium type magnets that I've shown you in the past, and I'll put a link to that video here above me so that you can go back and see it. And they work very, very well. I've been very happy with those as opposed to putting the ones underneath of the truck. So we'll be looking at how to go about doing that in the future too. Another thing that I've done here, if you look right here on the right in front of the Railway Express building, instead of having a single turnout coming in off of the main line that goes into that passing siding, I went ahead and made that a crossover, adding another turnout. So that way, as you can see in the track plan, that piece of track, the siding, extends back onto the other module there that will come in the future. And that would allow me to either put in an access track to whatever is in that area, or I could just run double track through that whole section in there. So we'll see how that works out in the future, because that's a way bit down the road. But at least by having that crossover there and that piece of track extending to the end of the module, I'll have that option in the future. Well, that's a wrap for today's video. So I hope you've got a better understanding now of how you go about installing turnouts on top of your roadbed. And in the next week, I'm going to be busy installing all the rest of these here on the layout, including the double crossover. And I will go ahead and film as I do that, and I'll put that in next week's video so you can see how you go about installing one of those double crossovers. And we'll start laying the flex track. So in the meantime, have a great weekend, have a great week, and I'll see you here next Friday with that video. Bye now.